let's start talking about macros. To begin with, I'm going to start with the let statement. So here it is up here. This is the let statement. You can use this let statement both inside of a data step and just floating around by itself. You can see down here, it's just floating around. It's just its own little thing. Macros can go wherever they want to go. We can put whole data steps inside macro do loops, for example. So macros are wherever they need to go, and this is how you define a macro variable. This macro variable can float around all over the place. So I'm going to define it as n. N is the name of the macro variable, and n is going to be 10 for right now. Now I'm going to create this array. If you want to go back and review your array statements, you can. And the name of the array is x, and the size of the array is the size of the macro variable we just defined, and n. It's going to be 10. Okay? And then I'm going to run through this do loop going from I equals 1 to 10, and then xi is going to get the value I. You'll also notice one thing about macros, that they turn funny colors in funny places. You're going to see some red later on in this program, but that's just kind of part of life with macros. They're not always exactly the right color. So what this does is it's going to create 10 variables named x1 through x10, and then they're going to take on the values 1 through 10. The point is that I don't want to, when I want to loop through this program more times, say I want to do this 10,000 times the next time around, I just wanted to check on it this first time, I'm going to start out with the value 10, and then I'm going to change it, but now I only have to change it in this one place. I only have to change it right here from being 10 to being 10,000, instead of having to change it several times through the program, and I might forget once and run the do loop through the wrong number of times and confuse myself. So it can be real nice for programming in that way. So this is what the data set ends up looking like, 1 through 10. Nice. Wow. Here's another example. You can see here I've got this macro variable is defined way up here, and then it's floating around in several different places. I can use it in the data step, in the procedures, and so on, and just keep using that same macro variable. And it can be the end of the name of a variable. So this is going to input variables y1, y2, y3, all the way up to y10, or excuse me, up to y4, because now we've defined n to be 4. We redefined it. So you can use this as the name of the variables. We'll see later you can also use macro variables to be the end of the name of a data set. So you can actually loop through data steps multiple times, naming the data set data, my data 1, my data 2, my data 3 with those macro variables. It's extremely powerful. So here's just a silly program to help us start working with the syntax. It's just a silly piece of code, like I said, but it can be useful. So let me start out with a black pen. What this is going to end up being is, this path right here is going to end up being this, because macro variable and DSN is defined to be CON, so that's where we get the word contest here. Note that it's followed by this dot. If you start out with a macro variable and you want to finish with more text, you need to write a period there at the end of the name of the variable. And then and path is of course defined to be this up here, so that's why the beginning turns out to be that. Another thing that you could have done is you could have made, say, another macro variable, let, say, end is going to be test. Suppose we had done that. Then we could have created this in-file statement. So in-file would have been, instead of this, I would have had quote, quote, okay, and path. We can start with that. Oof. It's hard to not be messy. Slash, and then I could have said C-O-N, and then just continued on with my test variable up here. I could write an ampersand, and I don't have to have a dot here. When the macro variable finishes a word, you don't need an ampersand. So and end is the name of the macro variable to write the word contest. But then, because I need a dot DAT, and remember, dot is what you need at the end of the name of a macro variable to start writing text. Here we need 2 dots before we write DAT. So it knows what it's doing. It's going to write dot to mean that, okay, that's the end of the name of the macro variable, and then it's going to write dot DAT, quote, quote, in its brains. So that's another piece of code that you could write instead. Just a cute little idea. And then if type equals B, so these are going to be only the B types that get written. And you can see this nice little piece of code here. Oh, I didn't run my let statements yet, so let me run this through here. So now you can see all of my type B's got printed out into a data set. This is just another piece of code to show you kind of the same ideas. Part is defined as awk print data equals and dsn dot te. So in other words, this and dsn, remember, was defined to be con. So this piece right here is going to be conte, and then we're going to end it with st. So this line of code is going to end up being proc print data equals contest. So this is just to kind of show you that you can define this macro variable to include another macro variable that was previously defined. Another thing that I'm doing is using this macro variable to denote the names of several different variables in the data set, name, age, and date. So this, let me change colors here. This piece of code, var and var type, is equivalent to var name, age, date type. So that can be a really powerful thing to do whenever you need several variable names in a place, and you're going to keep using those 4 variables all the time, and you don't want to have to type the names of all 4 of those variables every single time. You can throw them in a nice little macro variable and then just keep going. And then again, this should be contest because we're replacing that and dsn with the name of the macro variable, and then type equals and type, and then again we defined that type variable up here to be B.